First of all, let's check if you can hear me well. Please post anything in the chat window so that I will be able to know that you can hear me and you can see this title slide. Thank you. We're gonna start in a few minutes, just waiting for the rest of the audience to join us. So we are ready to start. Thank you so much for letting me know that you can hear me loud and clear. Actually, I didn't see the chat window, but my colleagues posted that you can hear me. Thank you so much for that. Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. We are happy to welcome you on our today's webinar with Alessandra Martelli. We are ready to start our online event, and today we will talk about transcreation. Alessandra will share some useful information about the key competencies transcreators need to succeed. We're gonna wait for the rest of the audience for 1 minute more, and then we're gonna start. Feel free to join this webinar on Facebook. Please follow our official Facebook page, Ukrainian Translation Industry Conference, or UTIC. You are welcome to share, like, or comment our live Facebook videos. We appreciate your feedback. Just to remind you one more time, we store our UTIC webinars and speeches on our website, utic.eu, in the video section of the site. You can always watch any video you need for free and on our YouTube channel as well. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see the link on your screens right now, and I ask my colleagues to post the direct link to the chat. Please let me introduce our today's speaker. Alessandra Martelli is a copywriter and translator based in Turin, Italy. She creates and translates marketing copy for online and offline promotion, materials for the travel and tourism industry, and medical content with a focus on medical technology. Alessandra is also a trainer with a qualification in teaching and the author of 21 free tools for translators. She is an avid reader, an enthusiastic traveler, and a lifelong learner with a keen interest in etymology, linguistics, and all things communication. Today's meeting is going to be hosted by me. My name is Stanislav Bogdanov. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the UTIC. Now it's time for me to turn it over to our speaker. And before I do that, I want to ask all of our attendees to send questions in the chat window, and I will ask all the questions in the end of the presentation. Hi, Alessandra, how are you today?
Hello, hi, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, hi, Stanislav. I'm well, you?
Yeah, fine, thank you. We are eager to listen to you today, so you have the mic. Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome, thank you. Okay, so hi everyone. I hope you're well, enjoying a sunny day, and I want to first and foremost thank you for being here with me. We're going to enjoy almost an hour together, and I hope you'll take away something useful and nice for your career and self-development from today's session. So, transcreation. Transcreation is something I love doing. It's something I've been studying and researching also ways to improve, to get better at what I do for quite a few years now. Also because there isn't much, how can I say that? There isn't much clarity often about what does transcreation entails and what you need to actually succeed as a transcreation specialist. And when I say succeed, I mean provide meaningful adaptation for your clients. So today I'm going to talk you through what we need when we actually do transcreation and some tools and ways that will help you improve the required skills over time. But before we start, I'd like to demystify transcreation a bit. When we think of transcreation, creativity immediately comes to mind, and of course, it's embedded in the name itself, so it cannot be any different. Creativity and its role in transcreation as opposed to translation work is also part of the beauty of it, and also plays a big part in the appeal that this kind of service has on translators that want to expand or branch out or diversify or just learn something new. But creativity in transcreation is not exactly what we might think it is. And I'd like to try to explain you how. So what you see on screen now is a random doodle that I found on Pixabay while typing the keyword creativity to find an image. And you see it's colorful, it's abstract, so it kind of reminds creativity because creativity isn't that tangible. But I will tell you that it is visible, even though it's not tangible. So I don't know if you have seen that famous hashtag, bad stock pictures of my job. I think this is a bad stock picture of creativity because it has no message. It has no structure. When you look at it closer, just after the burst of color has popped to your eye and lured your interest, there is no significance behind it. It's really just a burst of paint and swirls. So I think this is a bad example of creativity. A good example of creativity, on the other hand, could be this. Now, for those of you who are not into futurism as an artistic movement, this is La città che sale, which is a painting by Umberto Boccioni. It is currently hosted by MoMA. This painting was made at the beginning of the 20th hundred. And I think it's a good example of creativity because what Umberto Boccioni actually did there was actually breaking rules. Now, before this example of creative arts in arts and in paintings, you had lots of representations of urban landscapes. After, of course, the Industrial Revolution took over, artists started depicting cities with the new features. So the industry and mechanics, machinery, and whatever. But all of these industrial landscape, urban scenes, so to say, were depicted as traditional pastoral scenes. So they were actually still life. They were snapshots of everyday life in a urban city. You could see the steam, you could almost hear the sound. But when you looked at them, they were pictures. They were just representation of a landscape that had, of course, changed due to changes in the society and in the technique. But they were still bound to the traditional pastoral scene concept. So something that represents, that describes a story. What Umberto Boccioni did with this painting was actually switching the focus from the representation to celebration. If you look at this, you can see the elements of the urban industrial landscape in the background, in the higher part of the painting. But in the first row, the very first thing you see and what catches your attention is humans and horses. Now, humans and horses are not represented as anatomically perfect as with their dresses from that time. There is no dress. We don't know what fashion would be like in 1910 by looking at this picture. Whereas you could have a very clear understanding of fashion trends in most urban landscape sceneries before this painting. What Umberto Boccioni actually did was representing or narrating, I'd say, a city that rises so that it's changing and roaring and exciting, but also tiring and noisy and whatever, by picturing humans and horses as they were moving. So you don't have a representation. You kind of have a symbolization of the human intervention on the landscape. And by doing this, Umberto Boccioni actually changed the way that the Industrial Revolution was somehow perceived. It wasn't just something that was depicted. It was something that was profoundly changing, not just the scenery, but the human role in the landscape. So, and the human environment interaction in painting. You might wonder why it matters. I believe that it matters because transcreation is not that different. The creative element in Boccioni is not to pour his art into it and let it flow. It was rather like, knowing the rules of traditional painting, knowing the significance of pictorial elements and artistic decision on the perception of the painting and on the effect that it would have on an audience. And then what he did was actually deciding which rules he should break to bring a novelty element, a creative element, to add his touch into it. So when we think of transcreation, if you look it at the outside, it kind of looks like, I can tap on the wild side of my brain. I am creative. I can create ideas, generate metaphors. I'm very good at it, so I'm good for it. But if you have no knowledge of the context, of the rules and all of the other scenes, it just becomes a random doodle on Pixabay. It's not a piece of art, a MoMA worth piece of art. So looking at the big picture of transcreation, by thinking a bit about what it means, breaking the rules, we can see that transcreation is a process that brings so many facets to life. You don't just need random creativity. You need language skills, both in your source and in your target language, of course. You need to be aware of the cultural context your audience is in. And by looking at Boccioni, you could see that it's a very strong similarity because with what happens with arts and what happens with advertising, transcreation, they couldn't be more apart in a way, but they are also very similar. The kind of intervention that we made has to be the one of the artists that knows the rules, knows where he can add his own thing to it to make an impact. You also need to know the market. And at Boccioni's times, the arts market landscape, scenario, context, world, call it as you like it, was actually ready for that kind of revolution. And market knowledge is essential in transcreation too, because if you write a perfect message, a posh, spiffy message that really makes a difference, but you don't know anything about the market and you write something that is not acceptable in that market for advertising codes, or maybe just because the market deals with sensitivities that are very peculiar, not in the broad market context, but in the niche, then you're failing. You also need copywriting skills. And copywriting is not what we call creative writing. Even though the definition of creative writing in itself is very vague. So creative writing is described as any form of writing that is not bound by a function. So books, non-business blogs, and whatever. Copywriting is the ability to write copy. So marketing and advertising material. And to do that, you need to learn how advertising works and how copywriting works, the techniques, the tools of the trade, of the copywriter's trade. And yes, you also need creativity, but I argue that you need educated creativity rather than wild random creativity. And I define educated creativity in the context of transcreation as the ability to recreate the feel and impact of the text whilst playing by the rules of the project. Because when we apply our creativity to transcreation, we don't do it for ourselves. We are not artists that create something and then put them on display. We are craftsmen, and very skilled craftsmen that work on projects that are assigned. And just like great artists, from Leonardo all the way down to most recent painters and artists, failed when they missed the deadline for a portrait of a young, fine lady that was, commissioned to them and didn't get paid for it. Or subjects that were refused because they didn't comply to the client specifications. The same applies to transcreation. You have boundaries. So the goal here is not to display how creative you are for the sake of it, but rather to come up with a solution that would satisfy the need for creativity in the context of a campaign or a landing page or a slogan or rebranding or whatever. And there are many, many restrictions and specifications that might pose challenges to applying wild creativity. The connection between visuals and the copy as an example. Layout restrictions, how many times have we fought over layout restrictions because the client had put, 3 words and it had to be 3 words because more wouldn't fit the image. How much time can you invest in making it effective in another language with just the 3 words required by the restrictions in the layout? Characters, think app localization, think AdWords, think any kind of promotional banner. It will all be down to characters. Also, So the challenge is to educate your creativity. Other things can have an impact on and limit application of wild creativity, and that's because I say that you need to educate yourself. Because if you fail because you went too wild, it can mean a missed deadline of a campaign. And we all know that if you have to be online with something at that date and you're not online, then it's a problem for your client. It can cost tens of thousands of euro or corresponding, currency to your client. Because if you went too wild and made perfect transcreations with 20 characters extra for each string or alternative or rendition, and then the client has to invest maybe to pay a senior editor to work maybe another 10 hours on that, multiply it for a multilingual project, and you have tens of thousands and more time, which increases the chances of missing the deadline and coming down to lack of ROI. Because if you're late and you can't promote what you need to promote in time, then your return on investment is going to be so much smaller. So we need educated creativity. But can creativity be trained, actually? And I know that most of us have wondered about this. Science doesn't have an answer for this. There is no consensus. Some studies suggest that you can indeed train creativity. Some others say no, it's not, because we don't have, the figures. There is no statistical significance for that. We know that we don't know, but there's something that might help. There are several studies, and of course, our time today is limited, so I'm not going into much detail about the studies themselves, but backed by science, creativity, if it cannot be trained, it can be promoted. And some of the things that scientists know have been linked to creativity. One of these things is divergent thinking or divergent thinking. Now, divergent thinking is a term that was coined by a psychologist, Joy Paul Guilford, in 1956. And it is described as the process aimed at generating many creative ideas by exploring different approaches, by looking at things from different angles and trying to generate as many potential solutions as possible in a free-flowing way. This is absolutely critical in transcreation, because when you have to come up with 3, 4, 5 alternatives for a single slogan, and you have to do it within the boundaries of a deadline, you need to come up with many alternatives quickly. So trying to train your divergent thinking skills, science suggests that it actually supports and promotes creativity. How can you do that? How can you train this critical transcreation skill? Because when you have so many things to do in so little time, you cannot wait for inspiration to come by just falling from the heavens or God sent gift. You have to prompt your brain to come up with that, whether you feel it or not. So this is extremely important. Well, science says that brainstorming exercises and concept mapping exercises can indeed promote your divergent thinking skills. So that's good to know. Brainstorming is embedded in the transcreation process, but you can promote your skills by actually indulging in free, non-project driven brainstorming sessions. Over time, the ability to look at things from different angles and come up with many solutions, even the stupid ones, even the silly ones, even the ones that won't cut it through the brief. Because there is a colleague of divergent thinking, which is convergent thinking, which is, on the other hand, the ability to deduce a solution according to a preset set of rules or steps. So you can think about the brainstorming as the divergent thinking part and the validation of your alternatives as the convergent thinking part. And it makes perfectly sense in the concept of transcreation because you have both of these steps. Another thing that science knows promotes divergent thinking skills, and I'm very happy about it because I've been an avid player for 20 years of my life now, is tabletop role-playing games. What happens in role-playing games is not that you dress up weirdly. Well, you can if you want, but that's usually not that happens. What happens is that you're impersonating someone else. So you need to look at things from a different angle. You assess situations based on what your character knows and feels, not based on what you feel. And when you engage in such activities, something nice happens. It happens that your actor's brain comes up with solutions based on a certain set of information, whereas your character creates something different because you're actually not the same person. And yes, it's play, but playfulness has been linked to creativity as well. So these kind of games where you need to consider situations, impersonate, make decisions based on different context, actually promote divergent thinking skills, thus creativity. Drawing and free writing have been associated with this, so that's another easy exercise you can do anytime. You can doodle on a notebook. You can try, as an example, this is a very common example of divergent thinking exercise. Draw an apple and then think of the apple in different contexts. You can draw an apple on a tree, on the moon, on whatever, but think of objects or subjects in different scenarios. And as you draw, as you doodle your things, you might come up with something different. And that helps building up this ability of your brain. And free writing too, because you're not deadline bound, you're not project bound. You are free to explore, to think of 1,000 different adjectives to say exactly what you want to say, etc. So this is another thing that you can do for that. And again, not kidding, sleep is important for your divergent thinking skills. And believe me, by experience, it is also important for your transcreation skills. Because sleep deprivation has been associated with a deep and radical limitation of divergent thinking skills. So if you don't sleep well enough or long enough, your brain has it tougher when it comes to finding solutions, approaching a problem, looking at things from different angles, and actually coming up with something. So 4 points that will help you. And one, the best thing about the last one is that you don't have to do anything but take a good night's sleep regularly, because as science says, one night of not enough sleep is actually enough to affect, not of course permanently, but temporarily, your divergent thinking skills. So these are 4 things that you can do, and anyone can do that in your free time, whenever you feel like it, etc., to improve your divergent thinking abilities. And that would help with creativity as well. Another thing that has been linked to artistic and scientific creativity is openness to experience. Now, openness to experience is not a fluffy new age term. It's actually one of the defining domains of human personality according to the five-factor model, which was devised and then developed by different psychology schools or movements starting from the early 60s. Openness to experience is a way to define personality traits. And this domain actually includes different personality traits, such as fantasy or active imagination, the appreciation of arts and aesthetics. So people who are more keen to explore and appreciate and reflect on art and on aesthetics are more keen to be creative as well, because they are exposed to different ideas. Openness to experience also includes the awareness of your own feelings. People who show these personality traits have been, acknowledged with higher creativity or production skills. And renowned artists and scientists, which were considered highly creative, actually ranked best on these aspects, on these human traits, on assessment tests, of course, compared to non-scientists and non-artists. Openness to experience also means, also describes intellectual curiosity. So people who explore, wonder, think, consider, ponder are actually more keen on developing creative ideas. People who are open to experience appreciate adventure. They like to have different things in their lives. They don't just stick to the old views. So always according to science, being just open to the world, being exposed to different things and reflecting on them, actually wondering, what does it matter? What does it change? What does it mean for me? Can actually promote creativity, because it makes it easier for you to elaborate the stimuli you receive from the outside world and integrate the information, the suggestions, the concept that you come across with your own experience to generate new things. So, not trained, but promoted. And it's not as difficult as it may seem, because it just means keeping your minds and open, and your mind open and your eyes open as well, and thinking about what you're doing, actually savoring moments and experiences. And that's for creativity. But it's not all that matters, we said, so we're going to move on to the other pillars. And cultural awareness is very important. And this is important both in terms of sensitivity and understanding of source culture, as it is to be about your target audience culture, which is, by the way, your own, because transcreators only transcreate into their native language and for their locales. So this is important. Understanding, knowing the source culture well is important, because it makes it easier for you, as an example in transcreation projects, to assess whether the company has chosen a wording or a style of messaging that is considered standard for the niche industry audience, or a bit over the top, or disruptive, innovative, or conservative, as an example. And it makes it easier for you to savor all the nuances of the message, and it makes you able to reflect that in your adaptations. And of course, understanding of your own culture, of the target audience culture, is important because it is key to avoiding blunders, missteps, or misunderstandings, or those, tweet-worthy marketing fails. And of course, your transcreations will be tested by a local panel before they go live, and the company and your client makes a final decision about which version to adopt. But if you are aware of cultural sensitivities and issues, things like ethnic groups, sensitivities, religious beliefs, social beliefs, customs, etc., the more you are aware of it, the more you have a chance to get it right the first time, which means a better service for your client. Now, the best way to nurture cultural awareness, to dig deeper into your understanding of cultural sensitivities, it's exposure, of course, and the critical observation of what you are exposed to. Think about, watching those lame TV shows that teenagers watch in your target country. If you're going to work on several projects aimed at, a younger audience, would be good, because you will get in touch with the cultural references that are embedded in many marketing messages. And of course, you will also be aware of what that local audience, that niche, would look like in terms of beliefs, their role within the society and how they perceive that, because that is another strong aspect, cultural aspect, that often comes into play. It's not often spelled out in a source copy, but it's often hidden in between. The tone of voice, the nuances of language, the usage of idioms, of references, of what kind of emotional and psychological levers the source copy pushes or pulls, are often deeply rooted with the culture of the person they are aimed at. The person, when I talk about person, I talk, of course, about target audience, but it's the same thing. When you write copy, you write thinking of a specific type, a specific target. So you're actually talking to that person, not to a random crowd, as you can see. This one is in picture. One thing that you can do, apart from reading, watching, paying attention to conversations that go on in everyday life, to nurture and improve your cultural understanding of the people who will receive the messages you transcreate, is actually to draw comparisons between your source and target audience specific. And of course, you wouldn't be able to do that for all projects, but depending on the industries you serve, you will see that, and you already see that in translation, that you have broad target audience types that you come across frequently, because they're very typical customers for an industry or niche or product type. So what you can actually do to become more aware, more sensible to all the things that matter for these people, is to actually draw comparison tables, belief systems. I've done this a lot when I had to work on a project, a very interesting one. And it was the adaptation of the slogan for a product that was typically bound to religion beliefs, because it was actually a series of books about the Bible and such. So when we had to adapt the tagline for this project, I had to dig a bit deeper into what would prompt, an Italian, typical now Italian clienthood. And we don't, as a population in general, we don't care much about religion as we did before. Italy was profoundly Catholic 30 years ago. Now we have different religions, different groups. So it's much more varied. And the challenge was, how would you craft a message that would resonate with a couple or three of these different audiences? So what I did was actually trying to dig deeper into these kind of belief systems and draw comparisons. What would have appealed this audience? What would have appealed this one? What are the things that matter for them, not for the others? And to find, points of conjunction, something that we could elaborate to actually make the tagline work for a diversified target audience. So this is important. And these are examples you can do going into something a little less esoteric. When you look at US commercials, you usually have many references to sports, but you have references to football, American football, or lacrosse, or basket, which are very big in the US. When you look at sports-based cultural references in Italy, now things are really changing, but it's mostly soccer. So one thing you can do to understand your different audiences and be more quick in identifying meaningful substitutions or adaptations or rendition of a culturally relevant metaphor in your language. You can actually say, okay, so basket in the US means soccer in Italy, or maybe, I don't know, basket in the US is like cricket in India. And you can start developing a swipe file, so to say, of the things you can use to tap on the same concept where you have different cultural references. Cultural awareness is also linked and directly associated with another pillar of successful transformation. So the understanding of the market. And what I mean by market is target audience, of course. We just talked about it. So in terms of demographics, social groups, the culture, the beliefs, but also the attitude, the tone, the trends that come into play. Teens now have a way of talking that is not my way of talking. But when I have to adapt a message for a teenage audience, I need to know how they speak. So understanding the market, not just in terms of the market trends. Is it, on the rise? Is there a recession going on? And what about the niche, the industry-specific concept, which is also a pillar of the market knowledge domain as a transcreation skill? But also to understand, the market and the people within it. There are a few things you can do, as we were just saying. I stressed out long enough the role of exposure to the local culture and the target culture and the source culture. So exposure is a thing, but you also need good reference points and good research skills. So one thing you can do to refine your understanding of target audiences, of niches, of social and customer-wise niches, is actually listening to what these people are saying. What are the hot topics? how they speak, what's important to them, what matters, what kind of objections they would have, etc. You can watch the TV shows or magazines, targeted magazines. And of course, if you have broad, widely used products, you might that you usually transcreate for, you might well go with the, as an example, teen magazines, women's magazines, etc. But you can also look at industry specific trade magazines, so to say, that would give you both an understanding of the target audiences and an understanding of industry specific contexts. So that's plus. Another reference point that translators and transcreations usually forget about, but it's really a treasure trove of information and knowledge about the market from within the context of the people within it. National statistical reports. You will know if you look at, national surveys, not just the facts and figures, but customer surveys, whatever, you find tons of information about the spending, the attitude, the beliefs, all that matters when it comes to target audiences. And of course, entertainment in general is a good way. And of course, you need to be exposed to this and then reflect on what you can learn from this. For industry-specific contexts, it might be a bit more difficult to nurture your knowledge and build skill. You can do that usually for a restricted number of industries. I work a lot for the tourism industry. I work a lot for the jewelry and luxury industries. So I usually try to stay in touch with that kind of industries and niche market to keep up my knowledge. But other times I have a transcreation project for a product type or a service type that I've never worked for before. So I need to research to get an understanding, apart from the information that are included in the brief. And of course, your transcreation skills also depend on your ability to read and understand the brief. But understanding a brief is also, and knowing how to translate that into meaningful adaptation also entails being able to understand the audience. What does the target audience profile means? What kind of information is there and why it matters? For industry-specific knowledge, the best thing you can do is actually to get some good points of reference and improve your research skill. What I usually encourage to do is to look at industry reports. And I'll give you a kind of an example. Chambers of commerce, boards of trade, industry associations, they often publish reports on the companies that work in the industry for the nation or the region or whatever. If you look at technology as a very broad domain, there are lots of IT and technology related industry reports. There are reports for security, so the cybersecurity trends, as an example. There are reports on consumer goods, how many patents have been deposited over the last year or so. So get in touch with industries by looking at these industry reports. Check out boards of trades, websites, publications, etc. That will give you examples, not just about the companies, but also about the audiences, import and export trends, average spending on advertising, average return on investment in different kinds of advertising. So you may learn best what works and what's not. And all of this information you receive when you research the subject, and the subject in this case is your client or the industry he plays in. will actually come back to mind when you come across another project. Business and trade magazines. From, the National General Business Magazine, we have Il Sole 24 Ore in Italy, which is very popular, but the Financial Times, as an example, is a good source of information about different markets in different areas. You might also want to check your national advertising and marketing codes, because there are some sort of products that you cannot advertise as you would normally, or if the product is the slogan, the commercial is aimed at teens, you might have additional restrictions for teens on the use of language references, on the way you can translate a call to action, as an example. So this is also important to know whether there are any national or medium-based codes and regulations for what means legit advertising and what it's not. And another great way to gather industry-specific information about advertising trends and what works in the industry, what's hot in the industry, and how the target audience speaks, is actually looking at advertising archives. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of my favorites. And please note them down, because you will need them for the last part of the thing. Well, these are the things that I use to train my language and writing skills too. So keep an eye on that, because you can get a lot from a copywriting perspective, from a writing perspective, from a language perspective. One is Coloribus. I don't know if it's the correct pronunciation in English, but that's how I pronounce it in Italian, sorry. And the second one is Ads of the World. So these are basically repositories where advertising agencies and video makers, filmmakers, etc. publish their ads. And you can do some research by medium, dates, industries, which is very important, countries, which is very important, and of course, age or whatever, to look how similar products are advertised, as an example, to look at the creative campaigns of your clients' competitors, so you don't go the wrong way by mimicking, of course unwillingly, somebody else's claims. And this is another thing that matters. In market knowledge, of course, you cannot propose a transcreation that copycats a direct competitor of your client. At the same time, you do not want to propose an option, a transcreation option, that is too reminiscent of slogans, famous slogans or famous commercial for different products, because they will generate confusion nevertheless. And one of the things you need to be a good transcreator for your own country is to actually know what's going on in the advertising world. Know that, as an example, the biggest competitor of your client is using a metaphor that is an animal-based metaphor. You don't want to do the same for your client, because it would be considered as plagiarism. So be attentive to what's going on in terms of advertising in your industry. And to conclude this talk, I will move down to the last thing I encourage you to do to grow critical transcreation skills. And I will give you a couple of examples of how you can use the advertising archives to do that, which is deliberate practice. Now, deliberate practice is relatively newish, term. It was coined around the late 1980s, if I remember well. And it connotes a kind of practice that is purposeful. So it's targeted on improving performance in a specific task or domain. Deliberate practice is also systematic, so it's not, oh, today I feel like doing a writing exercise. You have to include it in your working day, just as you would with a client's project to make it work. You need to make time to practice your skills. And this is the best way to nurture, as I was saying, your copywriting and your language skills. Now, deliberate practice required focused attention on task chunks or specific actions within an actions. They do require self-reflection and implementation of the feedback you get or of the assessment results you see when self-assessing yourself. And deliberate practice also includes moving, pushing your boundaries forward bit by bit. What happens with this kind of thing? Once you have mastered one task, keep practicing it by raising, the challenge level, as any good RPG player would call it, the challenge level, of one bit further. So practice, but you cannot afford to practice only on a paid job, because that's not practice, that's work. So you need to include practice in your working day. Now, about writing a language and advertising, which is basically what you do when you transcreate. You can use advertising archives to make different sorts of exercises. These kinds of exercises will help you with different chunks. As an example, you could take one ad, and you have an example here which was published on Ads of the Word, I think, into April 2018. What you could do would be to reverse engineer, as an example, this ad. Look at the ad, ponder the copy, look at the visuals, look at what's written, what you see, remember the tie-ins between the visuals and the copy, and try to write the brief, try to sketch the target profile. Sorry, I think it's gone cuckoo. You can try to write down the brief for the tone of voice. So start from the copy and try to reflect and consider what comes before it. Or you could put yourself to the test and create alternative headlines. Now, one question that often comes to mind when I suggest this kind of exercises in workshops is, how do I know they are good? You don't need to know whether they are good. It's an example of divergent thinking, so come with possible solutions. Or if you're lucky, you can check the website of the company that has, commissioned the ad. Look if you have the brand guidelines online available, and there are tons of brand guidelines or examples of brand guidelines you can use to get used to this tool and actually practice some more, or try to write something for a company you found you can pinpoint down to the brand guidelines online. You can also go for a fine-grained analysis. Look at the language that is used. Look at the jargon that is there, if there is any jargon. Try to figure out why some metaphors or rhetoric devices have been chosen over others. And yes, to do good transcreations, you need to master rhetorics and writing devices. You need to know how copy works, what kind of impact the writing devices you use have on your audience, what kind of effect of rhythmic, of emotional effect they have on other people. So get your hand around a good book, a school book of rhetorics, etc., and try to practice them. As an example, say I will try to recreate this ad by using, another form of thought device or a different sound device. You might also want to try to tailor this to a new audience. And yeah, let's keep the teens as an example because it's so much easier if you follow along all the webinar. You might also want to find new reasons why. As you say in this example, 60 house fires a week. They'd act quicker if it was the Rome. And this is, of course, a call out for the government. So you might want to find other reasons why to back up the main headline. Or you might want to do something that's very funny, that is adapt this for a new medium. As an example, Twitter, I do lots of these exercises about rewriting things for Twitter because you practice brevity, which helps a lot when coming to character restrictions and layout limitations, etc. If you practice brevity, if you manage to squeeze the bulk of the copy into 180 characters, then you get used to learning shorter words that still have an impact. And that comes very handy when you need it and you have to squeeze in 18 characters in 10. Another thing you can do in terms of deliberate practice in writing a language, and this you can do it independently of the advertising work. Also, it's good to go outside your niche. So what I suggest in workshops often is to actually mix and match these exercises. Do something on real advertising to practice, and then do some so-called leisure, non-business, non-advertising related writing exercises. One thing that I found very useful when I first came across it, and I first heard about this exercise at the translation conference, university professor for language, Italian professor, was talking about, how he helps his students write better. Write word chains, he said. Try to move from one adjective to another adjective by changing the strength or the level of urgency of the adjective, or the pace of the sentence when moving from one word to the other. You can, I will give you a quick example. Start with tired. You can say tired, and of course it works. But if you say exhausted, that's a different level of emphasis, a different significance. So try to say, I will start with this thing and increase the intensity of the adjective one by one as I move from the first to the second to the third to the fourth, etc. So one example of a very quick word chain would be tired, exhausted, worn out, as an example. Or another thing that really improves your writing skills, your creative writing skills, as well as brevity and clarity, your mastery of the use of language and rhetorics and devices and sounds and punctuation. This is very important, even in short copies. So, is to explore topics in different formats. Say, instead of doing some free writing, you can say, okay, today, over the next week, I'm going to write about freedom as an example. On the first day, you can try a short essay or some kind of paper on the concept of freedom, of maybe about one aspect of freedom: freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of, commerce, whatever. On the second day, you can try your hand at a poem about freedom. And when you do that, you really want to use some metrics, because it comes very handy for transcreation, metrics and sounds. So go for structured poems. As much as I like free rhyme poetry, go for a sonnet. Explore different forms of poems. Different forms of poems require you to use language differently. On the third day, you can try to squeeze it up onto brevity and write an aphorism. This is an example of how you can explore different topics. And as you keep writing and revising your works, trying to assess or evaluate your works against a checklist or something that takes into a checklist that takes into account your specific weaknesses. I have a tendency to long sentences. This is something that I'm perfectly comfortable with. I can use long sentences in my own blog posts, as an example. But if a client asks me to transcreate a slog and I have time constraints and character limitations, I can't indulge in the beautiful and flamboyant long paragraph, as an example. So I know that one of my typical weaknesses would be brevity, and I train that. So when you put together these exercises, try to create a checklist, a deliberate practice-oriented checklist, saying, oh, I'm good at this. I want to be better at this. Let's try to up the challenge. I'm usually weak with, slogans. I'm not good with rhymes. I might need to expand my vocabulary so that I can find rhyming sounds or alliteration more easily. And then devise or find a writing exercise that helps you do that. Another writing and language related example is to write as someone else. Try doing that. Pick your favorite magazine or newspaper and try to mimic the tone of voice and the style and the usage of words of one of your favorite journalists or writers or poems. It's not plagiarism. It's a critical exercise that will help you translate the tone of voice of your client right. Because when it comes to tone of voice, it's not about us, it's about them. So as you practice writing as someone else, you will see that you experiment different tones of voice, different nuances, tailored to different audiences, with different, as an example, backgrounds, so reference points, etc. And you can get better at transcreation by learning to model language based on somebody else's preferences. And of course, read, and read outside your niche. Because the more you read, the more you are exposed to concept topics. Each industry, each niche, each domain has their own word and means of expression. So the more you read outside the translation blog or the transcreation blog or the writing blog or whatever blog, the more you read in varied contexts, the more you expand your vocabulary, expand your imagery, you get in touch with unusual associations that might help as well divergent thinking. And last but not least, read critically. So once you have stopped, once you have finished the reading session, stop by for 15 or 20 minutes and ask yourself, what did I like about this piece of writing? The structure, the sounds, that word that I didn't know about, and I love it because it's so precise. And then reflect a bit more. How can I embed this? How can I include this good feature in my writing? Or on the other end, what you didn't like. And then, am I doing the same mistake? How can I get rid of it? Or how can I avoid falling into this trap? So here it is. I think we're well past my hour. I'm very sorry. But to wrap it up very quickly before your Q&A, transcreation is not about creativity alone. Creativity is an element of an orchestra. It's a trumpet in a symphonic concert. It's not the soloist. There are many things that come into play, and all of these have to be in harmony to create something beautiful, meaningful, and effective. Creativity can or cannot be trained, so we might say might or might not be trainable, but scientists don't know yet. What they know is that being open to experiences really helps with that. They know that deliberate practice can help you engaging with things on a constant basis, can help you improve over time, even if you might not become the next Leonardo or Virginia Woolf or whatever. Being open to things, being aware of the things you're exposed to, reflect, be curious, try to source inspiration and ideas from different sources. Try to put what you learn into practice every day. I don't have a fixed schedule for you to say, oh, engage in very long writing sessions 7 days a week. I know no one of us has time to practice their writing 7 days a week, but you can do that 3 days a week, as an example, or 2 days a week. It's not about the quantity. Yes, it's also about the quantity, but you cannot trade quantity for quality here. So it's much better to have 2 deliberate practice sessions in 1 week than 7 days of oh, I will fill in an exercises if I finish up this to-do list. And of course, you cannot learn it all. You cannot know it all. So besides nurturing your skills and building on what you know to improve over time, you also need to develop some good research skill and have the reference points that will help you get your hands on the information you need quickly and effectively. Okay, I'm done. Stanislav, I'm sorry. I slipped through. I hope you're all awake. I will okay, I will close this and I will come. Okay.
No, you don't have to close. Just leave the slide switch.
Okay.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. The camera is good. Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Thanks a lot, Alessandra. It was a fantastic speech. So now we all know that transcreation, it's not only about creativity, it's an everyday hard work on one's skills. Alessandro, we have a couple of questions. Let me ask one by one.
Okay. I will just open your slides again because I forgot there are some more.
No, you don't have to. So it's do what is the most convenient for you.
Okay.
So transcreation is a multi-staged process, and it takes much more time when it comes to financial side. Is there any standards, limitations, or specific rules about charging for transcreation?
Well, transcreation is usually priced per project or per hour. And what you usually do is actually when the brief comes to you and the source material comes to you, you look at it and you kind of estimate how much time it will take and provide a cost. But from experience, if the project turns out to be much worse or more challenging or requiring more time, you just need to tell to the project manager, and they will update then the extras that that it might have taken. So of course, it's not a matter of how many words, because we all know that translating 600 words of a standard policy is much easier than coming up with 3 alternatives for a slogan. So it's usually priced by project or hour. And what you usually have is the clause that the project price is subject to changes if the project demands it, actually.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Alessandra.
Welcome.
Well, we have some time for more questions. One more. Here's one more.
Okay.
Can you please explain the difference between convergent and divergent thinking and provide us with some examples, please?
Okay. Okay. So,
if it is possible to do in a nutshell.
yeah, it's relatively easy when you don't think, at the terms as as the big terms, the big scary terms.
Mhm.
Divergent thinking means look at one thing and try to come up with as many potential options or solutions in a short, limited time. So, as an example, if I had to move my bookshelf from my office to downstairs, I live on the second floor, I could look at it from different angles. I could say, and this is divergent thinking. Divergent thinking doesn't judge the options based on their applicability or the fitness to certain rules or requirements. So I could say one solution is to I don't know, undo it all, unscrew all the screws, take down all the shelves, put them in a box, and take it down with an elevator. The second solution would be calling moving transport service and ask them if they can take out the longer shelves from the window, because it would be much easier. They won't fit the elevator, and the smaller we can take down with the elevator. Or I could say, and I know it's absolutely cuckoo, but that's not the point of it. The point is to activate your mind and try to look at things from different places. I could say, okay, we can just use a teleport machine and move it downstairs. Beam me up, Scotty, or beam me down in this case. And another solution would be, okay, so we can take half today and half tomorrow, because it's easier for us to, use the courtyard to stock it there for tonight, whereas tomorrow we have limited time. And this is an example, of course, a stupid one, because it's the first thing that came to mind, but it's an example of divergent thinking. You try to find different things that might help you solve a problem. Convergent thinking is kind of complementary. Convergent thinking means given a set of rules or steps, try to find the solution, one solution that respects all of these requirements, that abides to all of these rules, which is basically what you do when you have finished the brainstorming session of a transcreation and you start assessing your options based on the project requirements and the brief. So you look at each slogan, let's say, and say, okay, is this within the character restrictions? Yes. Is it truthful to the tone of voice of the client? No. Okay, so this is not an option. But and you move on and you scream. But with convergent thinking is actually an exercise that tells you the rules before, and then you try to take the single solution. You don't. Well, of course, in your mind, you do evaluate all the options, but you don't provide all the options and as an answer, as potential answers. You actually assess them quickly in your mind and then come up with the one that suits all the requirements. That's basically the difference.
Thanks.
And
Thanks.
if you have a look at divergent thinking exercises on Google or convergent thinking exercises, you might find quite a lot of exercises and examples and videos that explain you this thing. There are also some educational institutions that provide educational material and divergent thinking exercises online. Otherwise, you might want to keep an eye on everyday things. If you look at MacGyver, I know it's fun. I know it might sound silly, but he always makes things with a spoon and the pen, nothing more. So you could say, if I were MacGyver, how would I solve the bookshelf problem? Or I have to cook this. I don't have to. I still have to buy some groceries. How can I do that in 15 minutes? And of course, one of the options would be teleport, and we would all want to do that. But the idea is, okay, I can ask someone to go to the grocery shop as I, turn off the oven, or I could go out. Well, and you kind of come up with things, and it doesn't really require a manual or a standard, and you just need to think differently. If I were my mother, how would I solve the problem, and come up with the 2 or 3 options that she might choose, and they might of course be different from yours. And this is an example of what you can do to learn how to generate ideas quickly.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alessandra. And we have some time for one more question. On one of your slides, Yes, I have found this slide. A slide about divergent thinking, and there is a concept mapping on the slide.
Yeah.
Brainstorming and concept mapping. And I'd like to know, what about specific software? Do you use it for brainstorming sessions or concept mapping? For example, we in our company, we usually use Mind Manager for mind mapping. It is a specific software for mind mapping, and it is easier to hold brainstorms using this software.
I have to say that I'm a pen and paper girl. So I use sometimes Freeplane, which is a mind mapping tool, but I only use it to reproduce a mind map if I have to share it with someone. But most of the time I just do it on pen and paper.
Mm-hmm.
If I have to share it with someone, I just scan it and send it. I don't think that mind mapping tools make it easier for you to actually engage in the mind mapping or the concept mapping, the brainstorming. Of course, if you have collaborative brainstorming and you're working far away from your colleagues, then using a tool might help you share information, but it doesn't really help you come up with ideas. It might make it easier and nicer to see if you have nice graphics, etc. But I do most of my brainstorming and writing just on paper, and I found it easier to concentrate on the topic rather than on using the tool. So if I come up with an idea and I'm mind mapping and writing a structure as an example for a blog post or an essay, I do my map on paper, and I can just, swap the things. If something comes up, add an arrow and, add something, remove something, cross it down if you don't need it anymore. I found it so much easier to actually focus on the thing if I don't have to care about pushing the right button or whatever.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Thank you. Thank you for the speech and for answering the questions. If we have some more questions, as we agreed, I will post them to the Facebook, and I will tag you and ask you to answer on Facebook, because we are running out of time right now.
Okay, thank you.
Dear attendees, feel free to send all your questions to us, and we will ask Alessandra to answer. Dear friends, our next webinar will take place on October 4th at 7 p.m. GMT +3. Alessandra, would you please show the slide with the webinar?
I thought I have.
No, you didn't.
Okay, I just shared the screen. Okay, hi. You should see it now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Our guest, Jeanette Stewart, will share her insights of how the language industry is using the sharing economy model. Feel free to join us. Registration is already open on our website. And we are reminding you about the second Belarusian Translation Forum, our partners. The forum will take place on September 29th in Minsk, Belarus. Well, I believe the slide is in Russian, but oh no, bilingual. Thank you. The forum gathers more than 120 colleagues from Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, and other countries, and will make a great place for knowledge exchange and networking. The registration will be closed today, so step on it and get your ticket. To know more, please search the hashtag you see on the slide on your screen and visit the website of the event, translationforum.by. I'm sorry. To learn more how to stay in touch with us, find us on social media. We always list them on our video descriptions on YouTube. And now we would like to thank our UTIC Camp 2009 and UTIC webinar sponsors and partners. Our next live event will be held on July 2028 in 2019. We will be glad to meet our standing partners, and we are glad now to meet our standing partners in our sponsors team. We kindly ask you to give us some feedback. You can see a form to let us know your opinion about this webinar in the chat. You can see the link. And we don't say goodbye, as we will meet you soon again. Thank you so much. See you. Bye-bye. Thank you again, Alessandra. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.